let's get started with just a few citations in the beginning. I just picked them up over the past few weeks in some kind of quality newspapers, just to kind of setting the scene. And this is what I want first to do with you together. You know, what is it about? What are regulatory responses, and what does it mean in practice? You know, it's not a topic for idealists. Some still consider that, and including in enterprise, and a lot of enterprises, in particular what we Germany call the German Mittelstand, which is the backbone of the German, so to say, wealth. But many people there still appear to have failed to understand what time is it today, and where we stand in terms of environmental and these matters. So it's not an issue for idealists. You know, it should be core for business activities. And another thing from a scientist, you know, that climate change, you know, is about how we will live, but biodiversity and other things are about whether we can really survive. And, you know, the Earth does not require ourselves, but vice versa, we do. And then, of course, these days, multiple crises, you know, multiple things to worry about, you know, whether we should stabilize the economy first and then consider again or more nature, climate and other things. And the same goes for, of course, the major political discussion on, you know, the Green Deal, as mentioned before. And now we got the Green Industrial Deal. We'll see what this is going ahead with. I'm not ever advocating that we don't need a sound commercial basis, of course, for everything. We need to afford it. We need to take people with us, you know, just to proceed towards transition. And as I just envisaged, you know, just looking at the global challenges in a, what I would say, very straightforward and clear way that we all understand, and just recapture what is it all about when talking about sustainability. And it, as the title says, and this time the title is not from me, Alexandre invented it, but it's fine nevertheless, you know, about the governance aspect, mainly on dealing with sustainability from the perspective of the financial service industry. And of course, then the real economy, where the transition needs to take place. We look at regulatory responses just in an overview mode, and then I'll show you just a few slides on, you know, how we try to deal with this in practice, how we try to advise clients to get hold of that matter. And just from the beginning, I need to apologize to have less text and more pictures. I've been working for more than 15 years together with colleagues who have not been lawyers, for clients who have not been lawyers, for executives where their attention span for text slides was just 10 seconds. And if they didn't get the message, you have lost them. So apologies, I put things in pictures to a large extent, but also try, of course, to be aware of details, of legal details, regulatory details. And you can ask me, and you try to challenge me, of course, whether I'm aware of them or just telling you pictured stories. Whenever you find it appropriate to ask me a question or kind of tell me that I should consider something in addition or differently, before we have the official Q&A session at the end, just please feel free. We just then need to keep Natalie busy, that she goes on with the microphone, but we will handle that. If you want to ask, you know, otherwise we can just discuss at the end. So let's get through that over the next kind of 45 minutes. The global challenges, I mean, you're all aware of this generally, but I want to put it in an order and to put it down here in a not black and white only, but in a colored way. Of course, it's mainly about climate, and it has been about climate all the time, at the latest since the Paris Agreement from 2015, you know, from the Conference of the Parties. And you know, this was the COP21. Yeah, so there had been 20 before. You have heard about Rio, about Kyoto, possibly. So it took quite a time. And this then happens annually. Other than during COVID, there was one year it didn't take place. And of course, this is about the 1.52 degrees. And interestingly, I always try to highlight this here again in 1C, about the finance flows to be consistent with the pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. The financing point was mentioned already. And if you have followed the most recent discussions in Baku, in Colombia before, I'm touching upon it in a moment, about everything, about the green or clean industrial deal, as it's called now, it's about financing. And it was mentioned early in the morning already, mainly private financing, which will be required, and it needs to come from somewhere. Good. Just as an example, what one kind of root cause of the entire problem, so to say, the issue is in handling the climate crisis. This is from the World Economic Forum earlier this year, when they asked executive about their view on which global risks may come true over the kind of a 2 years term and 10 years. And you see the, so to say, environmentally related matters in green and other matters, including migration, inflation, social issues in other colors. And for the 2 years term, people consider weather, and the difference between weather and climate is always to be discussed. And they consider other issues to be even more relevant on the short, so to say, term perspective. And if you ask them for 10 years term perspective, yeah, then, you see those topics just at the top. And you can ask possibly, if nothing dramatically changes in the outside world in terms of climate and so on, that this will go on over the time, and therefore, again, the question arises, do things happen just by people, by enterprises changing the way they manufacture, they act, or does it require regulation, including, of course, incentives, not only kind of prohibiting things and so on. And Mark Carney, a former governor, he's Canadian, of the Bank of England, held a quite famous speech already more than 9 years ago, and this was called "Breaking the Tragedy of the Horizon." That it's quite clear the term of office of politicians, of senior executives, of others is usually 3, 4, 5 years, and it will become true, and it will become even worse, possibly afterwards. And this just needs, the human brain works that way. If you need to jump this one, you use the energy, and your brain makes up the energy to get over that hurdle. And if it's here, you try to get over there, but you don't jump this one for that hurdle. And just again, and some people are not entirely aware of this, as to my experience, it is binding EU law. We got the EU climate law. This is an EU regulation. I think it's of 2021, which makes and shows the ambition and transposes this kind of, climate agreement, general agreement to, which is not in that way specifically binding, of course, into EU policy and into EU law. And this includes the 1.52 degrees ambition, of course, but it includes this net zero commitment by 2050. That the EU wants to be net zero at 2050, and this is laid down in a directly applicable in force being EU regulation, the European climate law. And who needs to make this effective? Is it the governments? Is it Brussels here? Is it in Berlin? Is it elsewhere? It is being done by ourselves privately, and of course, all the enterprises or the institutions we are working for, we are dealing with. These need to make these things come true. And there are other things like this kind of Fit for 55, with these interim goals at 2030, 2040. And talking about climate change, you will be aware of this. Just to highlight it once again, it's about mitigation, so trying not to make it even worse with getting warmer and more humid and so on. And then adaptation, making sure, that what you can't change or what is happening anyway while you try to mitigate is in a way handled with that you have the wall, which is a bit higher when the water comes, just as a simple example. And talking about risks, people talk about physical risks and transition risks, not going into detail here. And funding, I already mentioned it. We need substantial funding, much beyond whatever has been expected and imagined, and still don't know where it comes from. We have seen it, and I just here on this slide on the right, on the top, you saw last year in the Emirates, and this year in Baku, just happened before these climate, these COPs. Always appears to be the same thing. 2 weeks negotiating. That's again, how the human brain works. 2 weeks of negotiating, and the things all happen during the last 24 hours, including with a certain extension. Then the pressure is at the point where you need it, and then you get a breakthrough, or you got certain kind of results. If that have been serious results here, people still considering. And it's about funding. Yeah, this is the discussion which comes up now, and including for the next commission with Frau von der Leyen. But we shouldn't forget, of course, it all belongs together, and it has interdependencies and. It's about nature at the same time, just for the sake of itself. And we got some very, very important initiatives underway. We got 2 years ago, there was under the UN biodiversity framework heading, they had this conference, and this is always also a COP. This only takes place every 2 years. And they concluded a global biodiversity framework, which is technically quite similar to the Paris Agreement for the purposes of restoration of nature and so on. To be honest, I didn't just get it effectively 2 years ago. To be honest, I got it sometime later. But this should be of same importance. And we know in Colombia, we had the follow-up conference, and again, discussions, and finally about how to get it financed. And we have, as we are here in the legal regulatory conference, we have the EU nature restoration law. Some have missed it over, during this kind of elections of the European Parliament, new commission, holiday times. It is also applicable and directly applicable and enforce European regulation, which contains certain kind of, I would say, bold ambitions, in terms of restoring land areas and sea areas by 2030, which is just about in 5 years' time, 20%, and by 2050, all ecosystems in need of restoration. And this regulation, if you look at it, therefore I put the number of the pages, contains, I think, 20, 30 pages of annexes where areas in respective EU countries are listed which appear to be in need of restoration. It mentions animals, it mentions populations, and things like this. Should be aware of this being very important. And you may have seen, I don't have it on this slide, that just a few days ago there was a kind of a global plastic conference on reducing plastic waste, and this didn't come to a conclusion. So there are substantial matters and substantial work is underway, but it's very difficult to just reach solutions globally and then unanimously, of course. And just to show, how it just simply looks like, it's an enterprise. It's the enterprises we see every day, we work with every day, and it's nature, and some call it natural capital. If you talk to people from, I think it's called First Nations, they don't understand what you mean, because they consider human beings to be the last ones on Earth. There has been Earth, there's been water, there have been plants, there have been animals, and then human beings came. So everyone is more or less has the same kind of subjective rights, and everything is to be dealt with in a similar way, needs to be in coexistence, in coherence. I would say we, or most of us, have been grown up with the European, possibly Christian idea of that Earth is to be made handleable for us, and we just handle things for the purposes of human beings, be it plants, be it animals, and anything. And what is just a message about this slide, that we talk about carbon emissions, we talk about waste and other things which impacts nature, and this is part of regulation these days. This is part of reporting obligations, which I will come to later on. But at the same time, this deteriorates nature to a certain extent. And then we have what is called utilization of ecosystem services, where you just use the nature, and which is mainly, we got price tags, we got, the emission trading and so on. We got increasingly price tags on this. But we have so far, I would believe, only rarely have price tags for what's on the right-hand side. And just two simple examples. You will all have heard about the one, but possibly not about the other. If you can Google that, to producing a simple T-shirt, there are about 2,500 to 3,000 liters of water being employed. This is not a new fact, but possibly another interesting fact is, and of course, the world is not all about honey, but it's about 75% or so of any plants which are being used for making food, making textiles and other things are being polluted by insects. So if you got less insects, you got these things not going on the way you know it, and you may need to pay for it. And then an example from a scientist from Frankfurt who just recently disclosed that kind of discovery he made, or the calculation they made. He said, look, if you look at and he said pot. I mean, in Germany, we have glasses of honey usually, but he said a pot of honey, but I shouldn't consider this to be such a big one. And all the bees which are being, or the bee work, which is required for getting this pot of honey being done, calculated at the German minimum hourly wage, yeah, which is, I think, about 13, 14 euros. How much, would it be if you just pay the bee for that hours of work? And it was 200,000 euros. I couldn't check it. I have no doubt to put it into question, but even if it's just 20,000, and this just shows what I want to with this slide. And the more you get deteriorated, it all belongs together, and the more you get into question with these kind of natural capital which you use and which you not pay for, and no one pays for specifically. And then finally, and 2-3 years ago, possibly already last year, I need to double check myself. I used to have 2 slides in the beginning. The one was about climate, and the other one was about sustainable development, generally speaking, with the SDGs. My kind of personal view on the SDGs has changed a bit over the time. I've come across a lot of clients. I mean, this is very important, of course. This is a UN topic. It has been kind of put into place a bit earlier than the climate agreement, just 3 months earlier. It covers a very broad range of issues, and it's fair enough, and it's very important for worldwide development. And I've come across a number of clients over the last 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and talking with them about their sustainability strategy, and many of them having a kind of more or less local German business model. They use and employ certain selected SDGs for the purpose of showing how sustainable their business model is, or how sustainable their ambitions are. And I always ask them, look, I think this is meant for the purpose of worldwide development in areas other than Germany, for example, or other than middle Europe, where you really need more than the 2, 3, 4 core issues, which we here, of course, still need, but all the other things are governed by law, are just accepted practice, and so on and so on. So just be a bit cautious about using worldwide sustainable development goals, which is more about development policy, I would say, for such purposes. Just mention this, by the way. Nevertheless, we will see, this is 2030, the Agenda 2030, which is quite close to come. And last year already there has been a kind of an interim assessment, and you see it's all not really working towards the objectives, understandably, as this is a very high ambition worldwide, of course. So this is just, simply the framework, about climate and nature, and if you want sustainable development generally. The question is then, what has regulation so far done with it? At least from a EU perspective, I think we would all agree that we have seen the first kind of important initiative, or compendium, so to say, of initiatives was the EU Action Plan of March 2018. I will come to this very briefly in a moment. And this was about, channeling, guiding investments more into sustainable, for sustainable purposes, for sustainable commercial purposes, and so on. And this was quite largely focused on investing. It was focused on institutional investors like insurers, pension funds, asset managers. The issue of bank lending just came over there a bit later, time by time, and still had the Commission identified in the beginning that we need, of course, financial service industry from its perspective needs data, needs information about real economy, as financial service industry cannot affect the transition itself. It just needs to play its role as a lender, as an insurer, as an intermediary, whatever, as an investor for the purpose of channeling investments to the real economy to get the transition effected. And I would say, sustainable corporate governance, if you would like to call it that way, more and more evolves, to an own area of of the regulatory agenda. And I will touch upon this in a moment further. And looking at, I drafted it the first time, I think 3 years ago. Now I need a second slide on the right-hand side. I need to just expand it somehow. It evolves over the time. It started with, I would say, second step before the first one, with financial service industry being governed in addition, as they are governed anyway. And then we try to address the real economy the way, of course, having in mind certain kind of limits of legislative powers at EU level, the real economy. This just a picture to show you. And for example, like the greenwashing matter, I believe Stephanie will address it after lunch, has a certain kind of role of, it appears to be a specific additional issue. For me, it's just another label of finding where the difference between, there's a gap between a claim and real life. Yes, and before we then actually come to the governance and the way it is being governed for the time being, just look at once again at the action plan, and I put the Green Deal on the right-hand side at the top. Sometimes you hear or read that people say, we got the Green Deal, and with this involved was some kind of taxonomy and CSRD and other things. I can say that I followed this just from the beginning, from very early 2018 and possibly even 2017. I found slides of myself of 2017 already. I couldn't just remember otherwise. But I think here it started in a way that you would call it sustainability regulation. Yeah. And the Green Deal then came a bit later, 5 years ago, when the Commission with von der Leyen started those days. And looking at these objectives, it's a little bit similar to what I just shown you before on my sustainable finance, sustainable corporate governance slide. With the taxonomy, we're not dealing with these matters today. Taxonomy, sustainability preferences, the idea of asking private investors to have an idea about whether one wants a sustainable investment in the sense of the taxonomy regulation and or the disclosure regulation, the SFDR. I think this is a very bold ambition towards what private investors are capable of and advisors are capable of advising them in relation thereto. Number 7 is the SFDR. And on the right-hand side, you see this was envisaged by the Commission. We need disclosure rules from enterprises beyond the financial service industry, and we need corporate governance rules. And talking about corporate governance and talking about disclosure reporting rules, which we will now do, try to highlight which are meant for specific addressees and for others. But generally speaking, of course, we have specific rules for financial services providers. And then we have rules which may generally apply to enterprises subject to certain kind of criteria which are met, and not specifically, of course, to real economy enterprises and or financial service industry enterprises. So when we talk about, sorry, and just to check, talk about sustainable corporate governance, what would it generally mean these days? I think you can distinguish 3 areas of regulation or potential regulation for the time being. Can talk about board and board members, and this is having this in mind. Generally, this was one reason why I was asking the questions, that very often one comes across that if those who are responsible and who have responsibility to make decisions, they of course need the knowledge, they need the facts, and of course they need to be bold enough to decide. And this is difficult enough, and this is, of course, can raise consequential issues, and decisions may be wrong. But I think accountability, and the financial crisis in 2008 and following has shown I still remember that, the authorities and others tried to make people accountable, and they couldn't hardly find anyone who just, was in violation in a kind of position of management, who was in violation of his or her, mainly his, to be honest, duties. Yeah, it was just a matter of non-compliance and so on and so on, but it was not a matter of personal accountability. I mean, if this needs to change, open question. I can just say that if you can make a decision and you are responsible for this, and this both goes together, you're not made responsible for something you couldn't decide, or you didn't have a choice, then normally it makes sense and it's a good incentive for people. But anyway, so for sustainability purposes, this has so far not been an area. For example, in Germany, corporate lawyers, academics discuss about what is in the stock corporation law included, because it mentions to a certain extent sustainable issues. From my point of view, this still means commercial sustainability, which is of course the basis for everything. Then the due diligence aspect, of more general or specific due diligence obligations. We come to this in a moment. And then the issue about reporting. But never forget, and I think this is quite important at this stage, and I want to mention it before I forget it, reporting obligations are disclosure obligations. There are two things. You got some kind of, if I call it real life, and then you got, you show it. You show what you consider to be real life or what you want to report. But reporting, and this is also what CSRD explicitly says, generally does not include substantive obligations in terms of what should you do so that you can properly report about a matter which is more sustainable or not. I come to this in a second. So always distinguish between substantial, and I would call them here due diligence obligations. In German, we say Sorgfaltspflicht. This is nothing about due diligence when you have an M&A deal or so. It's just the corporate due diligence, the responsibility of the management board, and then being delegated, of course, and organized properly. And then you get disclosure obligations. And I think one of the lessons learned, and we can't touch upon it here, of this first wave of financial services related sustainability regulation with the taxonomy and with the SFDR, in particular the SFDR, which is being debated whether it will just go on existing this way, whether it should be completely changed and so on. Different story. We can discuss it later on outside the session if you would like to. I've been dealing with this quite a lot over the time and following this closely now. It is a disclosure regulation. Yeah, it's generally. And okay. So let's see. Let's get back from the heading level to some details. I'm not going into very much details of the CSDDD. If you have questions, happy to discuss in a moment or later. This is, I would say, it was meant to complement, and you see it from the wording. The CSDDD was meant, I believe, to complement the CSRD, in terms of, as I said, disclosure and substantial obligations on the one and the other hand. And it's in force and needs to be transposed into national laws. Interestingly, and it's in Germany, it's often called or named as, so to say, supply chain directive. I think it's much more than this. It says, point 1, obligations for companies regarding, human rights and environmental adverse impacts. To just look, and it refers to these kind of activity chains, and it goes quite far. Then there's a civil law liability involved, which had been reason for many discussions. And then, and I would like to highlight this, this kind of transition plan obligation, and an obligation to adopt and put into effect a transition plan for climate change mitigation. And if you look at what comes next and after next in EU regulation, irrespective of there being, a cut down or whatever, it will be transition planning, I'm quite sure. Yeah, this comes now to a certain extent under disclosure rules. It comes here under substantial rules. It has come under CRD 6 for banks, which is still about to be transposed. And it is about to come under Solvency 2 for insurers, but transition planning for real economy enterprises and for the purpose of banks, for example, financing them, I think will be key for the next few years, combined with an understanding of how to finance that transition ambitions and steps. And if you look at details, I wouldn't go into these details here. Many points which can be considered to be really cumbersome for enterprises and which appear to be quite new to a certain extent, in particular in this way of coming together. Due diligence obligations, okay. Yeah, engagement with stakeholders, this obliges enterprises to a certain extent, to enter into discussions, to invite stakeholders to come possibly even to their corporate premises and to inform them about corporate details. There needs to be a complaints procedure, again, interaction with those who have complained. And I've discovered there's a new kind of job profile, which I think it's called human rights defendant. In the German version, it says Menschenrechtsverteidiger. It's quite interesting. Of course, it's a long word, but I haven't heard it ever before. It's human rights defendant. So possibly you just keep an eye on this if you need a plan C whenever, maybe. And of course, the climate change issue, this is what I mentioned in the beginning. You have supervisory authorities, you have penalties, all things which usually, I think, real economy enterprises would not have expected for every piece of rule they come across. This is just the way regulating financial services entities usually. Then the civil law issue to be discussed, and compliance shall be relevant for public procurement and concession purposes. So everything is in which can, in a way, hurt. And it has annexes, and never forget to mention with legal acts like this, it is not that the EU or countries within the EU are attempting to invent, kind of rules which mirror their kind of individual civilized way of living. And they try to make all the rest of the world, align with these rules. Because for various reasons, they may be at a different stage right now. It is generally about internationally signed acts, which have usually been, to my understanding, been signed by those countries where we do not see everyday human rights and environmental matters going ahead the way we would like to see them. Nevertheless, they have, in a way, signed from a governmental perspective. They just don't implement it properly. And these I mentioned, the relevant ones here I mentioned in this annex. And what's most important, it needs to be transposed international laws. For this time we have a directive, not a regulation. July 2026, and this was a huge discussion, you may remember, and the German government played a certain kind of not the best role in it. It had many problems anyway, and this was one of them. Just to reopen it after it had been agreed generally last December, but it was then re-agreed. The Belgians managed it in March, but the thresholds have been put up quite high, from 150 million as initially envisaged to at the end 450 million euros turnover and more than 1,000 employees. But you see, this is only in 2029, and the first ones who are being covered are quite large enterprises from the start. Third country enterprises may be covered, and if you have a group of companies where you have no single company which just meets the thresholds, you may then address the ultimate parent company if at that group level you get over that thresholds. So we will see what's happening. It has, in my view, it has the perspective of being a very important regulation and very important rules, depending to a certain extent on the national implementation, of course. But possibly, and then at least going together, just want to show you the Apple example I came across some time ago. Apple, of course, has a very fancy environmental progress report. And in that report, they also have a section on the Apple ambition of being carbon neutral by 2030, of course. And then they say, and I like the way it is being phrased, the company accelerates work with suppliers. What, I mean, we can guess or we don't. I mean, looking at these fancy things, you know, how much of that is being manufactured by an Apple enterprise? I mean, guessings are usually between 0 and 1%, other than, you know, kind of software and other things. But, you know, so this means Apple says, oh, I'm accelerating work with my suppliers. And you will be happy to agree that we should decarbonize, and you share our joint objective of being carbon neutral by 2030. So this needs to be by 99.5% be affected by suppliers. And then I always say, I haven't just come across, you come across people kind of claiming publicly and demonstrating for good reason that we have seen in the society of affected Apple suppliers. They just do it. Yeah. And I think together with such a regulation like CSDDD and with players like this who go on, you know, who go forward irrespective of rules because they can afford it, commercial sustainable business model, and they know this looks good, and they go ahead. And this will change things, including for smaller enterprises. And therefore, the discussion, which I often come across, is my enterprise, you know, it's rather small, including for reporting purposes. This will be the final session, a final part now. The bigger ones should do it. I'm just a small one. Yeah, I mean, if you have any kind of connection with bigger ones, yeah, then it will come to you anyway. May just take some more time. And then just a kind of a subjective collection of, in terms of, you know, what does rulemaking mean these days at EU level? Some things which I have just learned from also from clients and from doing corporate trainings over the time, in particular for real economy enterprises, more and more, what all may be relevant for them when manufacturing things and so on. And some of those are relevant, of course, also for financial service providers and are relevant for all of us. The deforestation regulation has just been, or appears now to be agreed to be postponed by 1 year to come into effect. So at the end of 2025. And what happened? There was the commission, you know, due to some kind of people asking, therefore, just issued a proposal of the 1 year postponement. And then others came and said, we need to change the substance of it also. But this failed. So we just keep it stays with the postponement. Then the carbon border adjustment mechanism regulation. It's about, you know, carbon pricing within the EU, not without, just to align it somehow for the purposes of fair market practices. But of course, this means bureaucracy, and this means data collection and so on. Becomes effective step by step over the next years. And a few other things, an eco-design regulation. If you really look into this and see what a product, and so far only products like you have a fridge or so, yeah, well, maybe you've seen these A, B, C, D, E with the colors. Only those products have been covered so far by EU rules, but now every product is being covered. Yeah, and it needs to a certain extent over the next time. There will be level 2 guidances and other things, needs to show what the carbon footprint is, and it says to the extent it's measurable, what the nature footprint is. And just on the right and on the top, in terms of we get less rules, not more. If my information is correct, the council just 2 weeks ago adopted the forced labor regulation, which is another, and you see most of these are regulations, yeah? Which means that if any kind of product which is being imported, sold within the EU, it could be evidence that this has been involved some kind of forced labor, then the product, and I think the regulation text says, needs to be disposed of. I would say it needs to be destroyed. Reporting. I mean, this is the most current topic we come across these days with clients. You know, they all struggle with these new reporting rules. And before we have seen financial reporting and a little bit as a, so to say, stepbrother or sister, the non-financial reporting, which has not really been in a way effective. And now we see sustainability reporting just, from the perspective of the rule maker being as important as financial reporting. And it's therefore, I have a certain kind of an interest in how things are labeled. Yeah. It's called sustainability reporting because it is more than non-financial. And here it has a good reason. And taxonomy reporting, I will mention this in a moment also briefly. Financial reporting, just as a reminder, it's a transparency exercise. It's not designed to make enterprises more profitable, to make enterprises commercially better. It's just transparency. Anyone can just make one's own conclusions and draw one's own conclusions out of those figures. And of course, the enterprise itself, hopefully. Sustainability reporting is also a disclosure a measure, but it's not just meant to disclose that you are not acting sustainably, because it's just cannot be the purpose. And fortunately, it isn't. I mean, so it's just meant to induce enterprises, to look into the mirror, to expose them to a certain kind of, a public feedback, even more than already, just to consider to get more sustainable. And, not only in terms of, I'm a good corporate citizen, and don't misunderstand me, my board is diverse, and so on, all important issues. It's about surviving or not, what I showed you at the beginning. Yeah, and surviving commercially as an enterprise. Some detailed issues, it's a directive, as it goes with the accounting directive, which it amends technically, needs to be transposed into national laws. And then we got the ESRS, I'll show you in a moment, which are a European regulation. It's like if you have dealt with MiFID, it's a directive at level 1, and at level 2, you find then the delegated regulation, and which is directly applicable, and no kind of room for movement insofar for national legislators. Coming to the ESRS in a moment, now part of the management has been before part of the management report, but even to be shown clearer, and it's which kind of makes my colleagues sometimes apprehensive and sometimes enthusiastic, needs to be audited mandatorily, and needs to be published properly. It has started to apply beginning of this year. I mean, there's another story about transposition into national laws. Should have been done by 6th of July this year. It's more technical pieces, I would say, and the reporting as such is, governed in the ESRS. For example, Germany is still in the parliamentary process of transposing this into national laws. We will see whether it works. As you may have come across, that the German government is now itself in a transition mode, and we will have new elections in February. And we have the principle of discontinuity, different than at EU level. If a draft bill has not been passed parliament properly, this just needs to be started from the very beginning again. And enterprises, of course, are a little bit of kind confused. I don't get the German laws, basically. What am I doing? But there's another story. And this year, capital market-oriented enterprises, banks, insurers, relatively bigger ones. And the next year in Germany, I think more than 10,000 enterprises. You need to meet two of three threshold criteria: 25 million balance sheet, 50 million turnover, more than 250 employees. And this is the main kind of area now to be addressed during the next year, and report needs to stand beginning of 2026. And just to show how a bit text I brought with me, sustainability matters are defined. I dropped, usually I have a section, but this makes it even longer, section on what is ESG and why don't I like it that much, and it has some reasons and blah. But anyway, I put it differently this time. legislator has been also a bit confused about ESG and what it really means. So they have tried to put together a definition on sustainability matters, which is a mixture of many things. And interestingly, it refers to the SFDR also. So then it doubles a little bit of those kind of aspects it refers to, but we always find environmental and social issues. So that's important. And here you find in paragraph 1 of Article 19A, which is the key message, the undertaking's impacts on sustainability matters and how these matters affect the undertaking itself. And if you look through the text, I'm not going through details now with you, you see that it's, pays very much attention to detail of the core corporate issues, of strategy, of business model, of boards, like in literacy, the role of the blah blah bodies, the expertise and skills, and so on. And this is how it goes on in Article 19A, and in 29B, there's, so to say, the basis for the ESRS, but we just go, you can read it up if you would like to. But here, shouldn't forget, the due diligence process, and all these matters are addressed in detail. And, the key concept about it is the concept of double materiality, which is similar to if you have worked with SFDR, a bit similar to, sustainability risks and sustainability factors, which are mentioned there when you look to the impacts to the outside world with the PAI perspective, and you look at the risks for an investment. And here it's this kind of, double materiality perspective relating to these sustainability matters. Yeah, and CSRD, to be transposed international laws, but where does the music play in practice? With the reporting standards, the ESRS. And again, CSRD, amendments to the accounting directive, it has been 10 pages in the EU Gazette, possibly altogether. And then you look into the ESRS, and it's just in the first set, in the set 1, as it is called, what you see here as the cross-cutting and topical standards, it's about 290 pages. And interestingly, and you have not come across this, fortunately, in your jurisdiction or language, the German version needed a second try. So it has been republished earlier this year because the translation went wrong to a certain extent. They translated strategy as Strategie, which I would say is right, and they translated policy also as Strategie and other things. So it was a bit cumbersome, but some of us are capable of working with the English original, so then it makes it easier. You got cross-cutting standards in particular. ESRS 1 tells you what generally this is all about. ESRS 2 tells you what you should generally disclose. And then you got so-called topical standards, and here you find the ESG. But looking at the G, for example, you then see it doesn't really work with ESG here because you can't, in a way, see what an impact on an outside governance is, because this just goes together with an institution and it's not an outside factor as such. But anyway, and it's about business conduct. It's the real governance issues, which I'm very careful of course, are in ESRS 2. And these ES and G standards, they are applicable subject to the relevant enterprise conducting a materiality assessment. And if they consider these aspects to be material, they need to report on it. If they consider these not to be material, they do not. More or less every enterprise considers at least ESRS E1, 5 and S1 being relevant for themselves, and G1 sometimes also. Many consider all to be relevant, of course. And how does it work? I mean, generally it's a technical exercise, and not bothering you with too much details here. It's at the end, it's about reporting in accordance with these E, S, and G standards. And in addition, you have some taxonomy reporting. You conduct the double materiality assessment, where you look at these sustainability matters. But as EFRAG says, the advisory group, which has prepared all these matters before and is still about preparing other things, just step back and understand the context. If you're an enterprise, look at your business relationships, look at yourself, look at your business strategy. And if you're working in the financial service industry, you may wonder then when I tell you, you come across a lot of enterprises, at least I come across a lot of enterprises, when you ask them, please, can you show me your written business strategy? They say, written? I send you a few slides. Is that okay? So this is a bit different than business and risk strategies, which are being documented and supervised. And if things are not documented, as we know in the finance industry, then they do not exist. So this is how it starts. And what's very important is getting connected with your stakeholders, internal and external stakeholders, the value chain, the activity chain. These are very important things. And it's really complex, and it's really some work to be done. Just very briefly looking at, what I need to report anyway, and why do I need to look? What am I reporting? Yeah. Do I want to report that I have nothing in place as regards my sustainability strategy, my processes, my policies? No, I should prefer to get it properly done while preparing for reporting. Looking at the specific topics which are subject to a materiality analysis, you see here under the E, S, and G standards, I put it on a slide altogether this time. This got subtopics and sub-subtopics, and looking at and talking about bureaucracy and things which go a little bit beyond and maybe over-engineered. The S standards, you see, they are quite detailed, yeah, and this goes quite down into detail about things which are relevant for workers in a value chain and others. And the G standards, as you see, it's not really about governance, it's about compliance matters and other things. So some things possibly have gone a bit further than they should. And at least EFRAG has some guidance for you, and the EU Commission, of course, provides some guidance, and it will go on providing some guidance. And we are almost ready. Don't worry, please. Finally, taxonomy reporting. We all know, I think, taxonomy regulation was meant for the purposes of identifying environmentally sustainable business activities for the purposes of making environmentally sustainable investments. And at the end of the rulemaking those days in 2020, Article 8 came into the text, and it addresses also non-financial undertakings. And it was meant to in a certain way, build a bridge between the old non-financial, still existing non-financial reporting and the evolving, still to come, financial reporting, which we have been talking about here. CSRD was not already in place. Oops. And then they tried to establish a certain kind of, with 3 KPIs, the portion of your turnover, the proportion of your capital expenditure and operational expenditure in terms of environmentally sustainable investments. And then you need to go through, again, taxonomy regulation, 29 articles or so, 15 pages, into level 2. The delegated regulations, the technical screening criteria, hundreds of pages. And this is also a very cumbersome exercise now for enterprises to report on, as taxonomy regulation reporting, as I have shown you here, is included in ESRS in the regulatory tasks. And the final 3 slides, and then you got it. Thanks for your patience. How does it look in practice, ideally? We always say, look, you need to report generally. You have some other issues to look at, substantial obligations, disclosure obligations, take these all into account. But first of all, take a step back, get an understanding. What do I mean when I talk about sustainability for my enterprise? Just define an ambition level. Make your targets and define a strategy so that you move ahead towards those targets. And then you can properly report on what you are doing here and what you're going to do. And if you see then, areas of action, and this goes to reporting, but it's just important for the sake of itself, then we say, get it synchronized, do it properly at the same time. And of course, if people complain about bureaucracy and reporting, they're not at the very beginning, when I talk to them, say, "Oh, good that you can help us with our governance and strategy." You know, they say, "Oh, what's that?" In addition, even, and then I try to explain. And finally, here you see with the enterprise, you know, all the things which need to be handled, those stakeholders from a real economy enterprises perspective, all these challenges from climate and nature, regulatory challenges, and then try to get it done in your enterprise, to get it organizationally done, to have responsibilities at board level, and of course, someone like a sustainability officer, if you would like to, and then you can go ahead with a proper transition planning. So governance, I would say, is the backbone. A good governance is the backbone of being well underway, being well prepared for sustainability purposes. This, of course, applies to financial service enterprises, not less. And I think this then finally, should it be, normally I have a slide that says thank you, but anyway, I say it this way. Thanks for listening, for your patience. When you have anything you would like to discuss, now or later, I'm ready.